And welcome back to another lesson of the Logos and Letters. My name is Liam, and we've got a pretty good lesson here. It's one of the final ones before we get to chapter 8, which is qualities, which is a much more sensory experience, but we've got a little bit of a complex one here. Just bear with me on this one. I'll make it quite plain to you. It's just the Greek is quite... I'm looking at it now, and it's that type of Greek that just makes you want to give up in a way. But let's have a good crack at it. So we've just talked about the definition, right? And the definition, he's explaining that sort of controversy we were talking about up here, the debate, controversy. And he's still addressing it, and he's giving it the light of day. I won't go over what I talked about in the last lesson. That would be superfluous. I'm going to continue on and try to add to that. Okay, so here's where we want to start. Ho de protoros horismos parakoluthai men pasitois prosti. So he admits that this the former definition is applicable to all of the relatives. Okay, pasitois prosti. All right, and what definition are we talking about? We're talking about how relatives have that correlation where they imply each other, where they point to each other, either obviously or not obviously. And he's going to talk about that obviously or not obviously thing here. All right, so keep in mind that a defining feature of relatives is the fact that they correlate and they relate to one another. So let's have a look what he says. Umein tauton geestitui prosti autois ainai to auto haperestin heteron legestai. All right, God help me. So what we want to start off with here is how do I put this together? Like, I understand what he's saying, but all right, so he's talking about other things, right? And it's the exact other things in relation to each other are relatives. How do I want to articulate that in English? All right, so when other things have their existence because of the other thing, that's quite relative, right? But it's not necessarily umen tautonge. It's not like necessary, or it's not a universal rule that if they find their existence coming from one another, that they are prosti, that they're relatives. Okay, ekte tuton delon estin hotiian tis aidei ti horismenos ton prosti. Right, so you should precisely know horismenos, precisely or definitely know. Someone should definitely know a relative if it should be clear, delon estin, it should be clear that it's a relative if you know what it's a relative of. Okay, for example, the best example here is half. Okay, if he thinks to himself, there's only half the amount of ships as there was before, all right, you and I know from that thought that he thought that there were 6 ships before. Okay, uno, dos, tres, there was 3. There's 3 here now, so there must have been cuatro, cinco, seis, right? There should have been 6 before. So half and double is a great explanation of what he's talking about here. So like, yes, everything sort of correlates, and there are these cases where their existence relies on each other, and if you do know that something is relative, you'll definitely know what it's relative to. Okay, that's what he's getting at. You know exactly what it is relative to. Haper, exactly. Okay. Ek de tuton delon estin hotian tis aide ti horismenos ton prosti. Right. Let's continue on. Kakaino pros ho legatai horismenos ai setai. Right. So he's just clarifying here. if you know one of them, if you know one of the relatives, and you know it is clear, dailon esti, that you know that it's a relative, you will know exactly to which relative is being spoken of precisely. And this hypothetical man will also know. So he's brought up a hypothetical here, this aidei, like he should know precisely. And then he says here, aesetai. This is like a middle future indicative active of oida, to know. So he will know for himself. So clarifying again what he's saying here with this really technical, dense Greek, he's saying this guy, if he knows any relative that he sees, all right, let's call him Nemo. If he knows any relative, okay, and he knows it for certain, he will know exactly to what that is relative to, okay, because of that rule of correlation, that they imply each other. He knows all this for sure, all right. So that's one thing, and the philosophers address that. Phaneron menun kai ex auton estin, right? It'll be therefore it'll be clear from which of them it is. Okay, so when you're considering a pair of relatives and you definitely know one of them, the other one will be phaneron. It will be clear. Iga roide tis tode ti hoti esti ton prosti esti de to ainai tois prosti tauton toi prosti pos kain. Goodness, now this is a difficult one. It's so long. It is so long. Let me take it piece by piece, okay? If, like someone should know that something is a relative, esti deto ainai tois prosti tauton. So if someone knows that something is a relative, or one of the relatives, you should know that it can have its being somehow, how, ekain, having, from the other thing. So we're talking about the relation here, not the actual existence of the substance, but the relationship. Okay, the relationship exists as an accident, right? The half and the double. It doesn't sustain the substance of things. Okay, it's not the reason why they exist. All right, it's just an accident that they have. Okay, and that sentence sort of clears that up. Kakai no oide pros ho tuto po sekai, right? And so if you know all this, you know this relationship to the exact same one, that person knows how it has this relationship. To put that into better English, let me get another. Yeah, this is perfect. Okay. Let's just say, for example, he's a father and a son, father and a child. Okay. If you know that he is a father, do you know that he has a child? Yes. Or maybe he had a child if tragedy struck, but you should know that he has born a child at least, okay? If anyone identifies as a mother or a father, you know children are in the picture, okay? If you know someone is a child, which all people are really, you know that they have a parent, right? A pair of parents, I should say. Okay, so that being established, that's an easy one. The philosopher so far has been saying that in these cases, we know three things. We know that the person can definitely know the relative, right? They can definitely know the relative without it being there. That sometimes our language helps us, and sometimes it is true that the existence of the two implies and is the cause for, is the reason for. All right. If you have a half, you have a double. If you have a parent, you have a child, right? A pair of parents, you have a child. If you have a child, that implies the parents, but it's not the same for all cases. Okay, so for a case, for example, employee-employer doesn't just like, it's not immediately obvious who's an employee-employer in that sort of way. It's not the cause for existence like a parent and a child is, okay? That's the cause for a substance. That's a very special relationship, very unique in our nature. But employer doesn't just birth their employees, okay, like some queen bee or queen ant, okay. Same with a master and slave in that way. So there are differences in these relationships. Let's continue on though, before I keep going down that rabbit hole. Iga ruk oiden holos pros ho tuto posekai udei prosti posekai aisetai. So now he's showing the converse. If you don't know as a whole the relationship and how it's had, and then you won't know the relative. You won't know how the relative is had either. Okay, so that is why he talks about creating paronyms. He talks about onomatopoeia to help that situation. If you, that's a pretty complex one. Let's use this one actually. So if you don't know the relatives, that's okay, because if somebody does know and doesn't know, that's just natural. That's just the way relatives work. It's not always obvious. For example, if a father has a son, it's not obvious that they are father and son. They can look different, okay? Especially in this case, where you've got the Trinity, all right, and you've got Jesus of Nazareth walking around saying, I am the Son of God, I'm the Son of Man. It can be difficult for Jews and Gentiles at the time to consider how he can be that. It's not immediately obvious to some. To some it is immediately obvious. You can see the relatives there. And the relationship between father and son is almost substantial in a way. In his case it is substantial. However, it is a cause of substance. And so what we're doing is we're walking a fine line between how people know in epistemology and how people don't know when it comes to relatives. Kai epiton kath hekasta de delon to tuto toyuton. Okay, we might leave it there because this is dense. I just want to summarize everything before we go on to the next lesson. Okay, so we'll stop here. Okay, that's a good place to stop. So, 3 things to take away from here, from this lesson. Relatives do not sustain the existence of one another. Okay, not in all cases. Relatives are an accident which exists in 2 different substances that are related by the relative. Relatives can imply each other or not imply each other. Relatives one relative can be known and then the other can definitely be known. Sometimes it is not clear. It is not clear that something is a relative. I'm pretty sure he says this here somewhere. Oide prosho tudoposekai. Iga ruk oiden holos. No, he says it down here. Iga oide this. So if you, so some people will not know the relative. In that case, if you do not know something that is a relative, in that case, you're not going to know that its other part is a relative too. So you're not going to know either of them, because if you knew one, you would know the other, right? You would know the other. So you don't know either of them. Where in the other case, if you know one, you do know the other. If you want a practical takeaway from all of this precision that we've been faced with, we want a practical takeaway, and not just for the biblical scholars this time. What I would say is we need to consider, when you're applying this logic to your everyday life, we need to consider relatives as not essential to the identity of the substance. Of course, that's the first thing. You are not defined by the relationship, the relative. The relative can come and go, usually. Mathematical relatives are a different story entirely. Don't think that they can just come and go. They are in their own special category, well, literally. But remember how quantities are sort of quite indifferent. They shrug their shoulders to a lot of things. If you want to go back to chapter 6, I explained that a few times. However, in your practical day-to-day life, do not feel like the relatives are so concrete, so established, so set in stone. If you consider yourself half as talented as somebody else, you might one day be in a different context where you feel twice as talented as everybody else in the room. If you are less, because less and greater are relatives, if you are less quick or less strong than other people in one context, you might be more strong or greater in strength in another context. Okay, so contexts do apply. Relatives come and go. Relatives are, these relations, they sometimes imply, but for a personal, practical level, and the Stoics will teach you this quite a lot. They love talking about this. Context and comparisons really do matter. Okay, don't let relatives get you down, and don't get too proud and arrogant if your relatives are in your favor. Okay, because situations can change. All right, so relatives such as age as well. Kras tibi odie mihi is a Latin motto where it says today you, tomorrow me. And I think that when I see elderly people as they're struggling, I've got a lot of respect for elderly people, but sometimes I think odie tibi kras mihi, right? Today it's you, tomorrow it's me. They might be older than me right now as a relative, but one day that'll be me, okay? And some other young person will be the younger one. So relatives change. Don't let it define things. Don't let it appear as if it is the source of the substance existence or the reason for the substance existence, okay? And we'll leave that there. We'll come back to wrap up, probably 2 more lessons to wrap up chapter 7, all right? And I will upload as well another one of those biblical lessons as well. So, thank you all for listening, and as always, si semper fortis in opere tuo. My name is Liam, and I'll see you next time.